A very good morning. You're watching World News, and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. French President Emmanuel Macron is visiting Poland on Thursday. Macron is set to hold meetings with his Polish counterpart Andrzej Duda and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Also scheduled for Thursday is a meeting of the Weimar Triangle finance ministers in Warsaw. Macron will be welcomed to Poland by Prime Minister Donald Tusk. The French President and Polish Prime Minister will reportedly discuss the war in Ukraine. Macron is expected to relay the details of the conversation he had with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy that took place after the Notre Dame Cathedral reopening ceremony and Mass over the weekend. Paris emphasizes cooperation with Warsaw because of its prominent role in the region and its presidency of the Council of the European Union. More on the importance of bilateral cooperation in this report.
French President Emmanuel Macron is facing plenty of challenges on the domestic front following the collapse of the government in Paris. But he's also got plenty on his plate when it comes to foreign affairs. The freshest item on his agenda is a visit to Warsaw, where he and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk are expected to discuss Macron's talks with Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Donald Trump, held on the sidelines of the Notre Dame reopening ceremony. The main topic is said to be EU security in the face of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as Poland is set to take over the presidency of the Council of the European Union in January 2025.
We had a good time together, and we had a lot of success, really great success working together on defense and offense too, and it certainly seems like the world is going a little crazy right now, and we'll be talking about that.
The upcoming visit to Poland will be President Emmanuel Macron's second. He was a vocal opponent of Poland's previous government.
We know that President Macron and the government of Morawiecki had some political tensions when it comes to rule of law, especially. We know that their meetings, their discussions were not as productive as someone could hope for. But politics is not the only thing that is the explanation for the rapprochement between France and Poland.
With a few exceptions, French-Polish relations prior to Macron's presidency weren't exactly perfect either, says Romain Lequenot of the think tank Eurocreative.
During the presidencies of Jacques Chirac, during the presidency of Nicolas Sarkozy, as well to some extent of François Hollande, there was a clear lack of interest. There was a clear lack of understanding as well of Central Eastern Europe in Paris. And one of the most important and symbolic illustration was that France for a long time has ignored the alert from Central Eastern Europe, from Poland, when it comes to the threatening behavior of Russia.
Now, however, it seems Paris has learned its lesson, placing the utmost importance on Poland ahead of its takeover of the presidency of the Council of the European Union.
The Polish foreign minister is traveling to Berlin on Thursday to attend a meeting of the heads of diplomacy of the European Union's Big Five. Radosław Sikorski will meet with his German, French, Italian and Spanish counterparts in Berlin. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy and EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Kaja Kallas will also attend the meeting. The officials are expected to hold talks on pressing issues for European security. A previous meeting between the heads of diplomacy of these countries and the EU took place in Warsaw in mid-November. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Wednesday night called for a united European stance on ending the war in Ukraine. During his nightly address, Zelenskyy said Europe's leaders must avoid efforts that showed a fractured position.
I have just spoken with the Prime Minister of Spain about our joint efforts in Europe to achieve unity that can bring us closer to peace. I'm grateful to Spain for its support, especially in strengthening our air defence. We will continue our work this week and next to make European positions stronger and help restore security to Ukraine and all of Europe. Coordination and joint efforts always yield results. This is what Europe needs right now, not isolated efforts contrary to everyone else on the continent. Achieving reliable peace is a challenging task, and we must be able to bear this weight.
With the war in Ukraine soon to enter its fourth year, talks about possible peace negotiations are growing more frequent. Asked about the prospects of ending the conflict by diplomatic means, Spain's foreign minister expressed his skepticism about the idea.
Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace. The only one talking about peace is President Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people. He has put a peace plan. Every time I hear the Russian talking about Ukraine, the word war is there. We are talking about a sovereign country. We cannot come from the outside and tell them what you have to do or not to do. And I'm not sure that they would follow any advice. And this is not what we want, because if Russia wins a war of aggression, the world will be less safe the next day, because that will prove that wars of aggression in 2024, they pay off. And the most important thing, when I hear also in Europe talking about a deal or a negotiation, we assume that if we talk to President Zelenskyy and he would accept, the deal would be done. What about the other side? I don't see them in a mood of any deal. For them, so far, negotiation looks like capitulation is the only content.
Austria will terminate its contract with the Russian state-owned energy company Gazprom. The move to cut Vienna's dependence on Moscow was announced by the country's Chancellor Karl Nehammer. In a statement published on X, Nehammer said that Russia wanted to use energy as a weapon against Austria. As Gazprom did not obey the terms of the agreement, OMV, the country's biggest oil, gas and petrochemical company, voided the contract, which was supposed to expire in 2040. Nehammer also added that Austria's energy supply is secure and that the country would not allow itself to be blackmailed by Russia. The decision to sever the contract was also confirmed by OMV's official website. Russia's so-called shadow fleet of the oil tankers will be targeted by the EU. Ambassadors of member states agreed on Wednesday on a 15th package of sanctions, which will target, among others, 45 third country ships transporting oil for Moscow. The fleet has been a key financial lifeline for Russia's war effort, dodging sanctions on Russian energy exports. The new sanctions package must now be approved by the EU foreign ministers on Monday. Apart from sanctioning the shadow fleet, the latest package also targets Chinese firms producing drones. Georgia's pro-European demonstrators took to the streets for a 14th consecutive night on Wednesday as international pressure mounts on the Georgian government. Recently, the French President Emmanuel Macron urged authorities in Tbilisi to release protesters he claimed were arrested arbitrarily. Macron's demand came during a telephone call with the ruling Georgian Dreams Party honorary chairman and billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili. Protesters in the streets of the Georgian capital allege that it's Ivanishvili who, despite holding no official post, is pulling the strings of power. Mass protests gripped the Black Sea country after the government announced its intention to pause EU accession talks back in November. In response, police have used tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowds, but have so far failed to dissuade the public. Arrests are also common, with more than 400 people already detained by the Georgian riot police. Relatives of political prisoners in Belarus came to Brussels to remind the world of their plight. The next presidential elections in Belarus are set to take place in January, but with the ongoing crackdown on the opposition, they will rather serve as a facade of democracy. TVP World's EU correspondent Angela Skujins reports from Brussels.
How are family members meant to pick up the pieces once their loved ones are deemed enemies of the state or are incarcerated and held excommunicated? Now, this is a stark reality for thousands of families in Belarus whose loved ones protested the 2020 elections. We're here in Brussels at a special art exhibition that aims to highlight and spotlight some of those stories of those people that are held behind bars. Now, we spoke to one mother whose son was deemed a political prisoner and who has been incarcerated for at least 4 years. Here's what she had to say.
He's in prison more than 5 years, 5 years and 2 months, about 2 months. Now I'm here to talk about my son Nikita and talk with people about my son's situation of the political prisoner in Belarus. And my teacher today, he's in my heart, in my mind every day. I miss him very, very much.
Now, with the 2025 elections ready to be kicked off in early next year, around January or February, all eyes will be on Minsk to see how those elections take place and whether they will be free or fair. Now, the EU quickly condemned the 2020 elections and said that it wasn't a free democratic contest. I guess we will wait and see as to what will unfold in Belarus and how the opposition will mount. This is Angela Skujins in Brussels for TVP World.
Members of the U.S. House of Representatives backed a record $895 billion annual defense budget on Wednesday. In addition to covering the purchase of military hardware and boosting competitiveness with Moscow and Beijing, the bill also aims to improve the quality of life for American forces. It supported a 14.5% pay increase for lower ranks and a 4.5% hike for higher ranks. The bill will now go before the U.S. Senate. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has invited Chinese President Xi Jinping to his inauguration ceremony, CBS News reports. The invitation was extended early last month, but it is not clear if it had been accepted. Xi Jinping's attendance in Washington would be unprecedented for a leader of China, the United States' major geopolitical rival. It marks a departure from Trump's position on China when it comes to nominating his secretaries. Among the so-called China hawks named to key posts is Senator Marco Rubio, who will lead the Department of State. Moreover, Trump has announced a series of regulations directly impacting U.S.-Chinese relations. Among them is an additional 10% tariff on all imports from China. It is still a lower percentage than what was announced during the presidential campaign when Donald Trump threatened tariffs of more than 60%. The leader of the rebel coalition that toppled Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria has vowed to hunt down and prosecute Syrian war criminals. He is asking foreign countries to hand over suspects to Syria's new interim government. Our correspondent Os Karaji is in the Syrian capital of Damascus with more.
The main commander of the coalition of rebel groups that successfully toppled the regime of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has vowed to hunt down war criminals in Syria and beyond, calling for foreign countries to hand over any Syrian that's responsible for atrocities, war crimes in Syria, particularly that of the torture and execution of detainees. Those awful images that have been splashed across screens around the world from the Damascus countryside, the prison of Sednaya, showing bodies piled up upon each other. Many thousands have thought to have been executed in Bashar al-Assad's prisons over the course of the 13-year civil war. Now, TVP World travelled into Damascus early on Wednesday morning, travelling from the northwest of the country in Idlib down to the capital city in the south of the country, following much of the route that the rebels took in that lightning-fast 13-day offensive down from Aleppo towards Hama, towards Homs. There's much that we can say about this. One of the things was notable how there were many armoured vehicles. I counted more than 30 armoured vehicles abandoned on that road that showed little sign of fighting and looked more like they'd been abandoned because they'd run out of fuel. Now, there is a critical fuel shortage here in Damascus, so that has clearly played a role in this, with reports that many soldiers did not fight and fled. There has now been a general amnesty issued by the leader of HTS, Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, who has issued the amnesty for conscripts, but again, he has vowed not to pardon the officer class, those responsible for the worst atrocities here in Syria. There's also been great concern in the international community about how minorities will be treated under this Sunni Islamist coalition that is now assuming control of the country. Well, I'm here in the capital, Damascus, and behind me you'll see Christmas decorations are up right outside the hotel that TVP World is staying at. So look, there's a lot to be said about this. There's a lot more to come, and there is a lot to be skeptical of in the statements of Abu Mohammed al-Jawlani. But for now, he is sticking to his word that he will protect Syria's ethnic and religious minorities, and that's something the international community are going to pay very close attention to, particularly with regard to sanctions relief and potentially delisting HTS as a prescribed terrorist organization. It's Oz Kataji reporting from Damascus for TVP World.
So this was all the latest news for now, but please do stay tuned here on TVP World, as we'll be back in just a moment.